I never believed in bad energy clinging to a place, until the first morning I woke up in that house. The air felt heavy, like the walls were listening. I told myself it was just grief talking. After losing my wife, I needed a reset. New state, new house, new beginning. What I didn't know was that I had moved straight into the territory of the most powerful HOA president I would ever meet. And she didn't just want control, she wanted obedience. The kind that breaks people. By the end of that week, I would realize this wasn't about rules, it was about dominance. And once she decided I was a problem, there was no line she wouldn't cross. The house itself was quiet, tucked just far enough from the main road to feel private. No close neighbors, tall trees, a long gravel driveway, exactly what I wanted. I hadn't even unpacked all the boxes when the first letter appeared in my mailbox. No welcome note, no introduction, just a thick envelope stamped with the HOA logo. Inside were violations, multiple, grass length, fence material, exterior paint shade, even though I hadn't changed a single thing since buying the place. At the bottom, a warning: failure to comply will result in daily fines. I assumed it was a mistake. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled into my driveway without slowing. A woman stepped out wearing sunglasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't ask my name. She didn't say hello. She just said, "I'm the HOA president. We need to talk." She walked my property as she owned it, tapped her pen against her clipboard, took photos. When I asked how long she'd been watching the house, she smiled again and said, "Long enough." That was the moment my stomach dropped. Over the next few days, the letters kept coming. New violations, new fines, retroactive ones, 2 dated weeks before I even owned the property. When I emailed the HOA office, I got silence. When I called, voicemail. But every evening, that same SUV would slow near my driveway. I installed security cameras. That's when things escalated. One morning, I woke up to smoke. Thick, bitter, the kind that claws at your throat. By the time I reached the window, flames were already crawling up the side of the house. I barely made it out before the fire department arrived. They ruled it arson. The fire investigator asked a simple question: "Does anyone have a reason to target you?" I didn't answer right away, but my mind went straight to her. Days later, as I was staying in a hotel and dealing with insurance calls, I received a notice. Not about the fire, not asking if I was safe. It was fine. For property damage and failure to maintain structure. That's when I knew this wasn't incompetence. It was intentional. What I didn't know yet was that this HOA president wasn't just powerful in the neighborhood. She had connections, legal ones. And the moment this case went to court, I would discover just how deep that corruption ran. Because the next letter I received didn't come from the HOA. It came from the courthouse. And when I saw the name assigned to the case, my blood ran cold. I stared at the court notice for a long time, hoping my eyes were lying to me. The judge's name was familiar, too familiar. It took a few seconds for the memory to click into place. The fire scene. The man in the pressed suit who arrived after the investigators. The one who spoke quietly with the HOA president near the caution tape. I remembered thinking he looked more like a lawyer than a bystander. Now I knew why. He was the judge assigned to my case. I called the clerk's office immediately, assuming there had been some kind of mistake. Judges recuse themselves all the time, especially when there's even a hint of conflict. The clerk sounded uncomfortable. She paused before saying, "There's been no request for recusal." That's when fear turned into something sharper. Anger. My attorney confirmed what I already suspected. This was a massive conflict of interest. The judge had personal involvement, direct exposure to evidence, and prior contact with one of the parties. Any ethical court would have reassigned the case instantly. But this wasn't turning out to be an ethical situation. At the first hearing, the HOA president walked in like she owned the building. Confident, relaxed, smiling at people she shouldn't have known. When she saw me, she gave a small nod like we were sharing an inside joke. The judge never looked at me. He dismissed concerns about the arson investigation as ongoing and speculative. Evidence from my security cameras was delayed. Requests for subpoenas were denied. Meanwhile, the HOA pushed their claims aggressively: property violations, unpaid fines, damages, even accusations that I had staged the fire myself. That was the moment the room went silent. My attorney objected so fast he nearly stood up. The judge overruled him without explanation. I realized then that the courtroom wasn't neutral ground. It was tilted, and it was tilted against me. Outside the courtroom, strangers approached me, not to threaten me, but to warn me. Neighbors whispered that this HOA president had done this before, ruined people financially, forced foreclosures, made lives unbearable until families gave up and moved away. No one had ever pushed back hard enough. Until now. I filed a formal complaint requesting recusal, ethics violations, conflict of interest, improper conduct. The response came back cold and dismissive. No sufficient evidence. That's when I made a decision. If the system didn't protect me, I would document everything myself. I pulled footage from every camera. I requested fire reports, investigator notes, dispatch logs, anything that showed who was present that night. And buried in the timeline was something no one expected. The HOA president had been near my property less than an hour before the fire. She claimed she was checking on another violation. No notice, no documentation, just her word. And the judge had signed off on ignoring that detail. Then came the invoice. Among the damages the HOA claimed, one line stood out: replacement of a table saw power cord. Cost $1,200. Even my attorney laughed when he saw it, but the judge didn't. He approved it. That was no longer incompetence. That was participation. Behind the scenes, the fire investigator quietly told me something he couldn't put on record yet. The burn pattern was intentional. Accelerant traces. This wasn't an accident, and someone had tried to interfere with the evidence early on. Someone with influence. The walls were closing in, but not on me. On them. Because the more they pushed, the more mistakes they made. And they didn't realize yet that every denial, every rushed ruling, every inflated fine was building a trail they couldn't erase. What they thought was control was about to become exposed. And the next move wouldn't be made in that courtroom. It would be made somewhere they couldn't silence. I stopped believing in quiet victories the day my attorney told me, "We can't win this where it's being decided." He didn't mean the law wasn't on my side. He meant the room was. The judge, the schedule, the rulings. None of it was random. Every door was closing in a way that felt coordinated. So I opened a different one. I didn't go public at first. I went methodical. I organized everything: timestamps, camera angles, reports, emails, unanswered complaints. I created a clean timeline that showed exactly when the HOA president had been on my property, when the fire started, and how quickly certain evidence had disappeared from official consideration. Then I noticed something else. One of my security cameras had gone offline for 12 minutes the night of the fire, not due to damage, not power loss, manual interruption. And when it came back on, the angle had shifted slightly, just enough to miss the driveway. That wasn't a coincidence. I sent the full packet to the State Oversight Board, Ethics Commission, Fire Marshal's Office, Insurance Fraud Division. Not emotional messages, just facts, documents, video. Then I waited. The first response didn't come from any of them. It came from a local journalist. She emailed with one sentence: "Is this as bad as it looks?" I told her it was worse. Within days, the story was no longer contained, not viral, Not sensational, just circulating. People who had been quiet before started reaching out. Former HOA board members, contractors, even a court clerk who asked to stay anonymous. Patterns emerged. Selective enforcement, retaliatory fines, evidence misplaced, judges who never quite recused themselves when they should have. And always the same HOA president at the center. The pressure shifted instantly. The next court date was delayed, then postponed, then reassigned to a different judge due to scheduling conflicts. That phrase would have meant nothing before. Now it meant everything. The HOA president didn't smile anymore. She sent a letter through her attorney accusing me of harassment and defamation. It was almost funny. Almost. Except for the timing. Sent the same day the insurance company reopened the fire claim based on new evidence. They had found accelerant residues, matching a brand sold at only one store in the county. And she had used her HOA card there 2 days before the fire. She tried to explain it away. Yard maintenance, community supplies, routine purchase. But receipts don't lie. Neither do timestamps. The fire marshal requested additional interviews. The judge, my original judge, was suddenly unavailable. No statements, no explanations, just absence. Then the footage surfaced. Not mine. A neighbor. A trail camera mounted near a fence line, poorly hidden, easily missed. It showed a vehicle matching the HOA president's SUV stopping near my driveway the night of the fire. No clear face, but clear enough. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, closed session, no minutes released. 2 board members resigned within 48 hours. That's when I realized this was no longer about my house. It was about a system unraveling. The HOA president still hadn't been charged. Not yet, but she was being watched now, closely, and people who once protected her were quietly stepping away. She had controlled the neighborhood with fear and paperwork. But she couldn't control what had already been shared. And the final reckoning wasn't going to happen in secret. Because the next step wasn't mine to take. It belonged to the state. The call came early in the morning, not from my lawyer, not from a reporter, from a number marked state office. For a second, I just stared at the phone, letting it ring because some part of me still expected disappointment. When I answered, the voice on the other end was calm, professional, and final. We're opening a formal investigation. No drama, no promises, just confirmation. By the end of that week, everything shifted. Quietly at first. Official letters replaced threatening notices. Requests came instead of demands. The tone changed because the balance of power had changed. The HOA president didn't show up to the next board meeting. No explanation, no proxy, just absence. Neighbors noticed. Contractors stopped responding to her calls. Even her attorney went silent for days. Then the subpoena started. Financial records, HOA accounts, expense reimbursements, community improvements that no one could remember approving, payments to vendors who didn't exist. One account alone showed tens of thousands moved through it with no clear purpose. Embezzlement wasn't just a rumor anymore. The fire investigation escalated as well. The state fire marshal took over. Evidence that had once been insufficient was suddenly more than enough. Accelerant traces, timeline inconsistencies, witness statements that hadn't been taken before were now documented properly. Including mine. For the first time since this started, I felt heard. The courtroom reopened under a new judge, one who asked questions, one who read the filings, one who paused when answers didn't make sense. When the HOA's attorney tried to argue that the fire was unrelated to the ongoing dispute, the judge shut it down immediately. That's not your determination to make. The original judge's name came up briefly, carefully, then not at all. But everyone noticed. A week later, He announced an early retirement. No press release, no farewell speech. Just gone. The HOA president finally resurfaced on social media. A vague post about false accusations and being targeted for doing the right thing. Comments were turned off within minutes. Behind the scenes, the state wasn't listening to excuses. They were following the money. The $1,200 table saw court invoice, flagged as fraudulent. The vendor denied issuing it. The handwriting didn't match. The account it was paid into led straight back to an HOA-controlled fund that she alone had access to. That detail mattered more than people realized, because it showed intent, control, pattern. When the arrest didn't come immediately, people asked me if I was disappointed. I was. I'd learned something important watching this unfold. Systems don't collapse loudly. They collapse carefully. Board members resigned one by one. The HOA's authority was suspended pending investigation. All fines were frozen. Liens revesées. Homeowners who had been silent for years finally spoke up. Stories poured out. Foreclosures forced. Harassment normalized. Threats disguised as compliance. She hadn't just targeted me. I was just the one who didn't stop pushing. Then came the knock. Not on my door. On hers. I didn't see it happen, but I heard about it within the hour. State investigators, financial crimes unit, fire marshal present. No sirens, no spectacle, just paperwork and quiet urgency. She wasn't taken away that day. But she was no longer in control. And for someone like her, that was the beginning of the end. Because when authority is built on fear, it can't survive sunlight. And the final chapter was about to make that very clear. The arrest didn't happen the way movies make you expect. No flashing lights. No neighbors filming from their porches. Just a quiet weekday morning when the HOA president failed to show up for a scheduled interview and she couldn't postpone anymore. By the afternoon, the news spread anyway. She had been charged, not just with one thing but several: financial fraud, abuse of authority, obstruction related to an active investigation, and most importantly, felony arson charges tied directly to my house. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. The accelerant purchase, the vehicle footage, the altered timelines, the money trail. When everything was finally placed together, the picture was impossible to ignore. She had believed the system would protect her. It didn't. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Without her control over the HOA, the legal intimidation vanished. Witnesses who had been scared before stepped forward. Former board members testified. Contractors admitted they had been instructed to inflate invoices or backdate violations. The judge listened. Every time my attorney spoke, he didn't interrupt, he didn't rush, he didn't dismiss. Justice felt quiet but steady. When the verdict came back, the courtroom didn't erupt. There was no cheering, just a long silence as the weight of accountability settled in. Guilty. On multiple counts. She was sentenced to prison time, not enough for some people's taste, but enough to send a message. Restitution was ordered. The HOA was dissolved under state supervision. Its assets were seized and redistributed to affected homeowners. My fines were erased. My record has been cleared. Insurance paid out fully for the loss of my home. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was peace. I rebuilt on my own terms. No HOA, no committees, no strangers telling me how tall my grass could be or how quiet my grief should look. Sometimes people ask if I feel satisfied. I don't feel revenge. I feel closure. Because what destroyed her wasn't anger or retaliation. It was exposure. The simple act of refusing to stay silent when silence was expected. HOAs like to operate in the shadows of paperwork and fear. But fear only works when people believe they're alone. I was, and neither were the dozens of homeowners who finally spoke up after seeing what happened. Power didn't leave her all at once. It slipped. Every time she overreached, every time she assumed she was untouchable, every time she forgot that rules apply differently when someone is watching closely. She thought she was enforcing order. What she was really building was evidence, and evidence doesn't care who you think you are. It only cares what you did.